Thank you. That's the end of my talk.
We're going to go ahead and get all of our presenters back on stage, and we will also be welcoming to the Circle Day stage the moderator of our Feed Your Funnel panel, Senior UX Research Manager, Sudhi Majd.
Thank you again to our wonderful panelists for sharing such incredible information with everybody. All right, so my first question is for Teresa. We often hear about people wanting to avoid email list fatigue for a reason to avoid it entirely, sending it out to their clients. How do you maintain engagement and prevent that from happening?
That's a really good question. And actually, it's funny because people often think they've hit fatigue before they hit fatigue, as in it's the business owners who are like, oh my God, I can't send that out. People aren't going to be interested in seeing it. So they're nearly anticipating this fatigue that hasn't actually happened yet. So the one thing I would say is, taking actually inspiration from what Omari just said there, is when you feel like you've hit that fatigue, just give yourself a bit of grace and be like, okay, let's take a step back and have a look at things. So I'm a big believer in evergreen content as well. And I would say, you may have shared something 12 months ago, 18 months ago, and it might still be relevant today. And maybe all it needs is actually just a little up-to-date twist, a little refresh. And perhaps, repositioning it with maybe a new email title, a new subject line that just kind of captures attention in a slightly different way. So, I think email list fatigue, it's there, right? The metrics are there to show it. But at the same time, I think to avoid it, first of all, give yourself grace, because you're going to think your audience is more tired than you. Okay, so let me rephrase that. You're going to think they're more tired, they will be less tired than you think they are. So first of all, keep that in mind. Yeah, and then second of all, just give things a little refresh, and you'll be really surprised how quickly you can bring your content back up to date.
Yeah, that's interesting. So putting this into practice, what kind of metrics, if anything, do you look at to kind of measure fatigue if it's happening?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question, actually. Okay, so first and foremost, I guess, and I spoke about it in my talk, email marketing, we do it primarily, the bottom line of it is so that we want to increase sales, right? So if you've noticed that those direct sales from your email marketing have dropped, that's it, the very first metric to look at. And then I kind of like to work backwards from there. So, okay, sales are down, right? Where else are we down? Are we down in people landing on the content that we're ultimately driving them to through our email marketing? So are we getting that click-through rate? Are we getting the open rates that we looked at? So really, I would say, first of all, look at our sales down and then work your way back from there. Are the click-throughs down? Are the open rates down? And if they are, that is obviously when you really do start to need to look at how you refresh your content. And look, A/B testing, there's nothing like, trying and testing, failing, refining, and doing it again and see if you can make it a little bit better the next time.
Yeah, grace.
Grace,
a common
right?
theme.
Let's take that one away with us today for sure.
All right, thank you for that wonderful answer. My next question is about personalization and kind of how this group puts that into practice. Haley, do you treat different audiences differently? So do you treat podcast listeners coming to a blog, for example, differently than blog readers looking at a video that you've posted?
For the most part, I don't. I think people are consuming content because they are relating to me as a content creator and what I'm teaching them. So for the most part, I'm sending the same message. I might tweak the long form versus the short form dependent on the platform. But for the most part, I try to infuse as much personality that I have into all the content that I create. And for the most part, the audience is the same. We all have different platforms that we consume content on, right? Like I might listen to a podcast or see someone's Instagram video, but I'm still there for that particular person. So for the most part, I don't switch it up too much.
Interesting. Okay. So as a follow-up to that, can you provide an example of perhaps a successful email subject line or video titles or social media captions that have generated high engagement for a broad group of people?
Yeah. So on my social channels, I started out talking a lot about my design process, and I realized that attracted a lot of fellow designers. And I'm also super transparent when it comes to money and pricing, and I think that a lot of people feel like that's missing in our industry. And so anytime I talk about pricing or what I charged, I always get a lot of really positive feedback from fellow designers like, oh yeah, like we need to talk about this. And that in turn, it tends to generate more people clicking through to my website and finding out more about the courses and products that I offer, supporting designers around those specific topics.
So it's kind of like finding a problem.
Yeah, so leaning into what I find works and then ending up kind of creating content around that kind of. So, I've tried various topics. I also talk about my design process and a particular method that I use called the one concept method. And again, that has done really well. So I've leaned into that and created courses and content around that.
Interesting. And Clary, yesterday we were talking about this subject, and you actually mentioned some really great tactical tricks to get high engagement. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. Some of my favorite tricks, there are a few. So one, actually, Trisan, you mentioned, is personalization. So in email marketing, your platforms, you have the opportunity to actually personalize those subject headings. So you could say, hey, name, did you know XYZ? Or even just ... and then get them to click into the email to find out what it is that they don't know. That's really cool. Also, I like to play with my case titles. So we were talking about this yesterday where when I'm working with a retail client, I will capitalize every single letter of, the first letter of every word in a title. However, when I deliver my emails, because it's a more conversational, I will just capitalize the first letter of the first word and everything else will be lowercase. So playing with your case titles. And then my favorite is emojis. Don't go crazy with the emojis, but having one or two can really make your email, your headlines stand out and increase your click-through rates.
Awesome. Yeah. Good to know. So you discussed repurposing content a lot in your talk. Can you give any tips for how one can kind of efficiently repurpose content without losing its quality?
Efficiently repurpose content without losing quality. I love this question because I think it's the question that keeps us from launching a lot. And I'm going to take a page from Omari's presentation. We have this kind of right brain and left brain thing. Like our creative side is saying, create, 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 create. And right when we're getting ready to launch what we're creating, our left brain entrepreneur kicks in and is like, but wait, is it good enough? What if they don't like it? What if it doesn't land? What if it doesn't sell? And it keeps us from actually launching the thing that we create. And so I work with a lot of clients, and other than just the creative side, we do a lot of launch therapy. And one of the things that I like to say is launch it ugly and build it beautifully with your community. So just put it out there. And your community is going to give you feedback about what's working and what's not working. And it's really important for us to understand who we're creating for and how they define quality. And as long as we're doing that, we can launch the perfect quality for the perfect people 100% of the time.
That's great. Yeah. All right, Omari. Hi. You talked about the importance of multiple content flywheels. How do you adapt your content strategy to accommodate the ever-evolving trends and changes in our audience preferences?
Yeah, I don't adapt to trends. What I found is that trends are cyclical. So if you find something that you like, you might be at the beginning of a trend, great, or you might be at the tail end of a trend. The good thing about being at the tail end of a trend is that if you stick with it, it typically turns into the beginning of a new trend. So if you try to chase the trends, I don't know what happens, but if you stick with what's true to you, the trend will eventually find you.
Being genuine, I really like that answer. And what role does storytelling play in delivering value through your content?
Storytelling is how we communicate every day with everyone we encounter. And so naturally, if you approach your content as a conversation, those stories will come up and the conversation will keep going. You'll have something to respond to. And so it becomes a more natural and organic process for you and the person, the people who you're talking to.
Awesome. Great. So, Teresa, I have a question for you around what platforms to focus on when diversifying content.
Oh, that's
Say I'm a designer with no time,
Yeah.
like none of us have in this room. How do you know what to focus on?
like I have one very clear and simple answer to this, the one that you like working on the most. Like, honestly, I can't tell you the amount of times people are like, are you on LinkedIn? I must add you on LinkedIn. I'm like, oh, it just kind of gives me the ick a bit. Like, don't get me wrong. I know that it's a really powerful platform, and I'm predominantly business to business, right? So it should be the place that I use, but Instagram is where I like spending time on Instagram. I like consuming content on Instagram. I like creating content on Instagram. So for me, that's my space. And I say that to my clients all the time. I'm like, whatever you're most comfortable with, work on that. And then, if you feel like you get to a stage where you're really comfortable and confident on that platform and you feel like you have the capacity to take on something new, then step into your next favorite or your newest favorite. But don't try to be all things to all people. I mean, we all know that like niching down can be a really, really beneficial thing to do in your business. So try and keep that in mind when you're, creating content for a platform that you like as well.
That's great advice. So I have a question for the panel in general, which we have, I think, almost half a century of experience sitting right here, which is really incredible. If you could go back to the very beginning, what would you tell your younger self now?
Who wants to go first on that one?
I can go first. That it's okay to go slow. Like, you don't have to do anything quickly, and success is not going to happen overnight. So give yourself grace and be okay with building things slowly. And when the time is right, it will happen for you, as long as you just keep going.
Pace yourself.
Yeah, I jump in on this as well, because you just mentioned the word success there as well. And I think, when I started building Squarespace websites back in 2014, my definition of success back then was totally different to what my definition of success is right now. And that's because my life has changed as well. Like, I now have a toddler, and, I'm like, I only want to work 4 days. And I don't even want to do full days either, whereas I thought success at the time when I started was, like working crazy hours and making, crazy amounts of websites and building them for giant clients. But that's not what it's about either. So I think you've got to be really dynamic with how you approach your business and what maybe the definition of success is as well. And I think for me, like, that would have been a really big one. And the other thing for me then as well would be like, don't be so scared. Like, exactly as Omari said earlier. And I think everybody touches on it. I feel like we're in an era where we're all okay with it. Like, you can make mistakes and still launch, and then refine as you go.
Right.
The word for me was dynamic. So we started our business back in 2014. We were a PR company, and today we focus on digital products. And our business has looked very different at each stage throughout that process, and it is very dynamic. And I guess I'll share what my mentor shared with me is building a business is a lot like tilling a garden. Sometimes you have to rip up the soil and you have to even tear it down and totally destroy it to build it back up to what it needs to be. And so we might hit a point in your business where you're like, what I'm doing isn't working, or like, I really need to niche down, or for most of us, it's going to be, I need to stop doing a lot of stuff that I'm offering and I don't actually really enjoy it, but I do it because I think people will want to buy it. And we have to get to the point where we're okay with shaving things off and tearing things out and taking parts away from our business so that we can get to the core of what we really enjoy creating and what we're really, really good at, because that's what's going to shine through and that's what's going to attract the right people to us. So not trying to be everything for everyone, and also just giving yourself permission to break it down and build it back up again.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I love that.
If I were to go back to Omari 10 years ago, I would whisper in his ear, keep going.
Yeah.
It gets better.
That's great. All right. Well, on that wonderfully positive note, I want to give our panelists another round of applause. Thank you so much. And guys, enjoy the rest of your day.